Good evening. Friends, this week we mourn the loss of the world's chief rabbi, Rav Yaakov Zvi ben David Arya, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. And I say the world's chief rabbi because his impact was vast, well beyond the UK. And remarkably, everybody I've spoken to seemed to know him so personally, whether it was a fleeting encounter that left an impression, or the fact that his words made an impression that he speaks directly to me. So many say. Chief Rabbi was a giant who, with his God-given gifts of intellect and his eloquence of word, spoke to the world. He touched hearts in the deepest of ways, and he found a way of making Judaism fresh and relevant for everyone. But what was remarkable about the former chief rabbi, Rabbi Lord Sacks, is that he never sat still. After retiring, he could have stopped, but he continued with this tremendous, palpable sense of urgency that the world had so much more to learn, so much more to hear. And he didn't pay lip service to that which we often speak about, the idea about Kiddush Hashem, making a sanctification of God's name in this world. He lived it. He was our leader, our representative, our ambassador to the world. And I believe that he taught us something, he taught me personally something that I often share with different people. That non-Jews respect Jews who respect Judaism. And they are embarrassed by Jews who are embarrassed by their Judaism. These words hit home like a blow when I saw the editorial by Prince Charles in the Jewish News. A man that may very well be the future king of our country, who took the time to write 500 words of depth, meaning and feeling. He said about Rabbi Sacks that his passing is the most profound loss to the Jewish community, to the nation and to the world. And that those that knew him through his writings, sermons and broadcasts have lost, in his words, a source of unfailing wisdom, sanity and moral conviction in our confusing times. He had lost, he said, a trusted guide, inspired teacher and steadfast friend. Rabbi Sacks could be relied upon to identify clear moral issues in the question and to define fearlessly the choices that had to be made. He could cut through all the confusion of our concerns with grounded scholarship, both in secular and religious studies, that made him that unique voice, that ability to speak with conviction across all boundaries of every religion, of every culture, and every generation. What better way is there to honor Rav Sacks, Zichrono Livracha, to raise his precious soul in Shamayim, than by sharing his Torah? 8 years ago, he shared the following idea on Parashat Chayei. I'd like to echo some of his words. This week's Parashat Chayei focuses primarily on two distinct episodes in extreme detail. At the beginning of the parsha, we find Avraham coming to the place where he needs to buy a burial place for his wife. He ends up buying a field and a cave. And then the second chapter of this week's parsha, he instructs his servant Eliezer to go and find a wife for his son Yitzchak. Why are these two events mentioned in the Torah? The simple answer is not just they just happened. Because it says if it just happened, then we misunderstand Torah. The Torah is not a book that tells us just what happened. It's not a history book. Torah is from the word hora'ah, which means to teach. It tells us what happened only when those events have a bearing on what we need to know. What then is the teaching in these episodes? And I think it's a very unexpected one. Abraham, the very first Jew, receives two promises from Hashem. Each of those promises are given 5 times. The first one is the promise that he will have a land. Time and time again he is told that the land to which he's traveled to, the land of Canaan, will one day belong to him and his people. Hashem appeared to him and said, this land will be given to you. That was in chapter 12, chapter 13. Look at where you're looking at, north, east, south and west. All this land that you have in front of you then, that you see, I will give to you and your children ad olam, forever. and 3 other times in different chapters. The next promise was a promise of children, also stated 5 times. V'etzcha legoy gadol, I will make you a great nation. In Parashat Lech Lecha. V'samti et zaracha ke'afar, your children will be as great as the dust of the land, that you can't even count. Verses and pesukim that compare them to the stars and compare them to the stand, telling him that you will be Avraham, that will be your name, the father of many nations. These are remarkable promises. But the reality is, in this week's parsha, when Sarah dies, Avram owns no land, and he only has one son. Yishmael, he's told, will not be the bearer of the brit, of the continuity of your line. And therefore, the significance of these 2 episodes is very clear. Because at the beginning, Abraham undergoes this whole lengthy, humiliating bargaining process to buy a field and a cave to bury his wife. And the Chittim say one thing, but they mean another. Ephron says, yeah, I'll let you bury him for free. You can bury your wife. And it was just a whole negotiation of hard bargaining. Then she has to pay an exorbitant amount for the field. He even says, Ger v'toshav anochi amechem. I'm a stranger amongst you, meaning I have no right to land either. But finally, the sale goes through. The transfer of ownership is made. And is recorded in very legal terms to signify and to signal that Abraham finally owns the land. But what does he own? It's a small piece of land, a field and a cave. This is all that remains or has come about of the divine promise of Hashem that Abraham will see in his lifetime. And the next chapter tells of Abraham's concern that Yitzhak should have a wife. Yitzhak is at least 37. He's not yet married. Abraham has no children. He has no grandchildren yet. No way of living on. No continuity. And acquiring a daughter-in-law is equally as expensive as buying a field to bury his wife. With a lot of money and a lot of negotiation, Eliezer finds his wife for Rivka, for Yitzchak. But getting her family to allow the Rivka to leave was another matter. He brings out the gold and the silver and the gifts, and they have a party. But then Lavan turns to Eliezer and he says, let her stay with us for at least 10 years and then she can go with you. He plays a role not like Ephron. Show of generosity conceals a very tough determination to make a deal. Eventually Rivka leaves, she marries Yitzchak. The Brit, the covenant, will continue. These are not minor episodes. They tell a very difficult and a very challenging story. Yes, Abraham will have land. Yes, he will have countless children. But these things will not happen soon, and they won't happen suddenly, and they won't happen easily. Nor will they occur without human effort. Only focused willpower will bring them about. And Hashem's promise is not what it first seems, that he will act. It's a request, it's an invitation from Hashem to Abraham and to his future children, that is us, that they should act. And when we act, then Hashem helps. Then the outcome will be as Hashem has said. But it's not without total commitment from Abraham's family against what often seems as massive hurdles. A land, Israel, children, Jewish continuity. And it's at this point where I am blown away how Rabbi Sacks makes this teaching so relevant, so fresh, and so contemporary, even as it was in 2012. Because he says that it's the astonishing fact that even today, 4,000 years later, these 2 ideas remain the dominant concerns of Jews throughout the world. Number 1, the safety and security of the land of Israel and as a Jewish home. And number 2, the future of Am Yisrael, of the Jewish people. Abraham's hopes and fears are our very own. Friends, is there any other people in the world whose concerns today are what they were 4,000 years ago? That identity is incredible. Now, back then, as it was exactly the same, the divine promise does not mean that we can just leave the future to Hashem. To the contrary, the Brit with Abraham, the covenant with Abraham, is Hashem's challenge to us, not ours to him. The meaning of the events in this week's parasha Chayei is that Abraham realized that Hashem was depending on him. And as Rabbi Sacks concludes, faith does not mean passivity. It means the courage to act and to never be deterred, that the future will happen, but it is we, inspired, empowered, given strength by the promise, who must bring it about. Yehei Zichro Baruch, may his memory be for a blessing. Shabbat Shalom.